that very simple feature is really what probably most people use most often when they're using Pixel, because it's what allows Excel users to continue using Excel in the way that makes sense to them. It's the way they've always built spreadsheets, and it's what allows Python users to very sort of seamlessly bridge their world of these Python functions into Excel in a way that feels natural.
Hello and welcome to the Pybites podcast, where we talk about Python, career, and mindset. We're your hosts. I'm Julian Sequeira.
And I am Bob Beldebos. If you're looking to improve your Python, your career, and learn the mindset for success, this is the podcast for you. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to the Pybites podcast. This is Bob Beldebos, and I have a very special guest this week, Tony Roberts, the creator of PyXLL. Tony, welcome to Pybites podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, Bob. Yeah, thanks very much. I'm good, thanks, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to get started.
I'm excited to have you here. I started in Excel and VBA macros a long time ago. That was actually my foray into programming. And you built a very cool tool that combines, that brings Python into it. So we're going to dive into it. But first of all, maybe do you want to introduce yourself to the audience, our audience?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, combining Python and Excel is something I've been doing for quite a long time. My background, well, originally I studied kind of engineering and computer science at university, and then went into video games. So I spent my first few years of professional life writing stuff for PlayStation 2 and Xbox and GameCube and that things. And then it was really only when I moved to London, because that's where my friends lived after university, that someone said, "Oh, have you thought about working in finance?" And at that point, I was like, "No, I've never thought of that." But anyway, I did, and ended up getting involved in Python development and stuff like that on the finance side. And yeah, now I help companies work with their Python processes and integrating those with Excel, so that development teams can be more effective and more engaged with their business users.
Excellent. Yeah, so it was very accidentally that you ended up in this space then, right?
All the best things are accidental, I find.
True. Yeah. All right, before we dive into more about the details of PyXLL, how it works, and the backstory, do you have a win to share?
Sure. I've actually got a couple. So one's like a personal one and one's a professional one. So the professional one is I was talking to people about performance of Excel spreadsheets and this kind of thing, and performance of Python. And I kind of thought, how far can I push some of these things? And I actually ended up, this was on Saturday morning, just in a couple of hours, getting Doom, the video game, running in Excel.
No way.
That was kind of yeah.
Amazing.
What was nice about it was using an Excel RTD function. So all like not doing nothing like really tricky. Just there's a Python library out there that has a generic Doom port. So I got that working on Windows and then got into Excel pretty quickly. So I'll be doing a video and a blog post about that at some point, I'm sure. But I was like, when it worked, I was like, oh wow, that's like really cool. So
yeah, that's
nice.
awesome. You're going to put that on your YouTube channel, I guess, right?
Yeah, definitely. I will do. And the other one was I started cycling, I guess maybe a couple of years ago when I moved out of London, road cycling, and joined a club. And at the beginning of the summer, I bought myself a fancy new road bike. And then I went out earlier in the week and did my fastest ride, which was, I think I did about 30 miles, 50K, with an average speed of like 17 miles an hour, which is 30K, that kind of thing.
Wow.
Which is
Nice.
not much for, professional cyclists. But it was for me, having really only kind of got into it properly at the beginning of the summer. I didn't think I'd be doing that a few months ago. So that was great.
Those are great wins. A win I wanted to share, and most people have heard about it, is that we moved from Slack to Circle, our community. And we have a really nice, one-stop place for all our stuff, right? Our coaching, our courses, and yeah, Circle is a pretty amazing platform, where Slack I often associate with work, and it's very in your face the whole time. Circle is really nicely abstracted away, and it's not disruptive, right? And so far so good. I think you already joined there, right?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
I've said this to you before, but I think the way that you approach the coaching, I think, is really, really good, and I really like that community aspect of it. So that's a great win.
Thanks. Yeah. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about Pixel, of course, a bit of the origin story. Yeah, what made you build it? What was the need you saw, and how were those that initial prototyping? How did that go?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I touched this on a little bit in my intro, but it was really when I moved to finance. I started working at this fairly small hedge fund, and until then I'd been, deep in low-level programming and assembly and things, and then suddenly I was in this world of finance. And the thing that struck me almost immediately was how everything was done in Excel. So the team that I was in, it was only a really small IT team, but we were building out, moving to a new portfolio management system, and we were porting a bunch of different processes and setting up, all kinds of things like for the entire operation of the fund. And we settled on Python as our main language, having had previously things were done in a combination of Perl and C and stuff like that, but we were kind of starting with Python. And what would happen was each time we'd deploy some new functionality, I'd go and speak to people on the desk, or I'd speak to people in the middle office, and I'd say, "Oh yeah, we've got this great new thing like integrated with the PMS, and we've got like all these like web reports and things." And the response is always, "Okay, yeah, this is cool, but how do I get this in Excel?" And it was just funny how like every time it was like for people working on a trading desk, for them to move outside of what they're working in, which is a lot of the time Excel, into something else is just a disruption in their workflow. And so that was like a bit of an eye opener for me. So I spent quite a bit of time playing around with COM. I'd done some .NET development in the past, but I hadn't done a huge amount of COM. So I learned COM to a pretty ridiculous degree and managed to do a lot of automating Excel from Python. And it kind of worked. And I got it to a point where it was kind of good enough, but it was always quite clunky. And so you'd often have things where stuff was deployed to a desk and it would just, for some reason, just stop working. Some permissions would change or some COM control would get uninstalled or whatever it was, and it would just break. So it always needed a bit of nursing. And I just was thinking, I'd seen things like managed XLL at the time, the .NET one, and I knew there was a C API for Excel. And I was just thought, well, why isn't Python better integrated into Excel? And that was really kind of the origins of the thought process around it. But then things moved on. We started up a desk in New York, so I moved there for a little while and was busy with other things. And then it was the financial crisis it was actually while I was in New York around 2007, came back in 2008, and things were winding down. And it was really when I kind of left that fund where I'd been for, I guess, 7 or 8 years, something like that. This idea of wanting Python to be properly integrated into Excel and be like a first-class add-in was really stayed with me. And so I just kind of developed it, and I did a quick prototype. There was some crazy ideas which I wasn't sure were quite going to work, but I managed to get something that kind of worked. Demoed it at a Python meetup in London, and the response I got was amazing. And so then I was like, okay, wow, like this is something that people really need. And then so then I kind of developed it pretty seriously, and that's kind of how it happened.
Amazing. Great feeling, right? When you see that confirmed and you have your prototype and you see there's demand for it. And so,
Absolutely. And uh, I think it was a great feeling to see that people were interested and people were actively engaged. And people often ask me why I don't just release it open source. And the reason for that is really, I guess I always felt that I wanted it to be a more professional service. Obviously, lots of open source projects are incredibly professional, uh, but I also knew that my target audience was these finance companies that I've been working for. And I kind of saw early on that there was enough demand that, it should be so that something would value enough to pay for it, and, I'd be able to support and all this kind of stuff. But the most gratifying thing was really early on after this initial prototype was when it was actually like one of the sort of, largest hedge funds in the world. One of their people talked to me and was like, yeah, I want to start using it. I want to start using it now. And they were willing to pay for it like straight away. And and it's weird, like it sounds really materialistic and horrible and stuff. But when they actually like paid me the money for it, that was a really good feeling. Not because of the financial aspect, but just because I think I was so used to working where, you know, your time is what's valued and what you get paid for. And to have that completely flipped on its head and say, okay, well, yeah, you've developed this stuff and I value it enough and I value your work enough to give you some money, rather than just saying, I want you to do 8 hours of work every day for me. It was, for me, it was just this sort of light bulb moment in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to do things as a hobby, but at a certain point, you also want to kind of see if you can do it professionally, and that often then goes with turning it into a business, right?
Yeah.
Well, I will get back to the business side of it, but first I wanted to know some of the more concrete features, advantages. Yeah, maybe some top 1, 2, 3 features you're really proud about, and that really drive home the the advantage of this tool.
Sure. Sure. So the main feature is probably the one that was actually in place first, which is user-defined functions. And this is really the key of like why Pixel was developed in the first place. So the ability, a user-defined function for people that don't know is in Excel where you do like equals sum something or equals, you know, whatever. That function there is an Excel function, a worksheet function, but Excel has the capability to add user-defined functions. So a Pixel user-defined function is one where you write a Python function, add a simple decorator to it, and then that function is instantly available to call from Excel from the worksheet. So you can do like equals my Python function, blah, blah, blah. And that very simple feature is really what probably most people use most often when they're using Pixel, because it's what allows Excel users to continue using Excel in the way that makes sense to them. It's the way they've always built spreadsheets. And it's what allows Python users to very sort of seamlessly bridge their world of these Python functions into Excel in a way that feels natural. And it seems like a simple feature, but it's probably one of the hardest things to actually implement. And getting that right has, I think, really been key to why Pixel's become, you know, as successful as it is.
That sounds amazing. So I can basically write any Python function and then call it as a regular Excel function in a cell in a workbook, right?
Exactly, yeah. And in a nutshell, that's what Pixel does for you.
And you mentioned decorators as well, not to go too deep into the implementation, but that of course I need to know about. How does that work?
Sure. So the decorators really, when the Pixel add-in itself is a native add-in, so it's kind of mostly written in using native code, a combination of C++ and assembly. And what happens when Excel loads the add-in is it loads the Python interpreter, obviously, and then imports all of your Python code that you've asked it to import. And the Excel func decorator, Excel func is the decorator that you use to expose a user-defined function. All that does really is register that function with the Pixel add-in so that when the add-in starts up, it then knows what functions you've asked it to expose to Excel. And there's various options to that decorator that you can tell it about what the argument type should be, how the Excel values should get converted to Python, whether they should come in as, you know, plain numbers or strings or pandas data frames or polars data frames or whatever it is. And there's various other options to do with help text and stuff like that. But in essence, that's it. And then there's various other decorators that work in a similar way. So there's the same one for Excel macros. So, you know, in Excel, where if you have a macro, you can assign it to a button and click the button and some code runs. You can do the same with Pixel using this Excel macro decorator. And there's various other ones for, what else is there? Oh, there's one for adding menus to the Excel toolbar. There's other ones for providing custom type converters and all this kind of stuff. I don't know, something about decorators I really like, just because it's a really neat syntactic way of doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite design patterns because you leave the functions untouched and you can just sandwich behavior around it, right? Which
Exactly.
seems a great match in your case.
Yeah.
Nice, nice, nice. So, is there any success story or some cool use case from all the users that have used it over the years that you want to highlight?
Sure. I can't really go into details too much of exactly what you know, a specific user does with it. But I was speaking to someone just a couple of weeks ago that was showing me what they had built, which I thought was really cool. I was just watching his screen and I was like, oh my God, like this is awesome. And this was someone that had been working for kind of a large investment bank for a long time, so had a lot of trading applications and a lot of experience in finance. And they'd moved to a much smaller boutique firm where they were just a team of, I think, maybe 3 people with basically no kind of IT infrastructure. They had the firm's position keeping system and a few APIs for getting market data and things like that, but not much else. And what he was showing me was essentially an entire trading application written in Python on top of these APIs that they had to access these other internal systems, but without writing any user interface code or any of this stuff. He had written the entire application in Excel, where he could see his obviously his positions, but also an order book, and even down to doing sort of marking market data, whereas marking vol surfaces and stuff like that. And kind of the depth of what he had built was really, really impressive, and the time frame that he'd done it in was astounding. So that was really, really nice to see. Like that's exactly what it was built for, and it was really pleasing to see that someone had used it to that extent.
Really cool. Just curious though, the Python code that is involved in any of these projects, where's that hosted? Does that live in Excel, or is it where does it actually live? I mean, in terms
Sure.
of version control, that's my concern.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's really important to a lot of the enterprise customers. So the Python code is actually completely separate from the workbook. All that happens when the add-in loads is in the config file, you give it, like you would a Python IDE, you tell it the Python path you want it to use. And then all the Python code gets loaded from that. So that means it could be a virtual env on the local computer, which it often is. That's usually the fastest way. But some people use it as they point it to a network drive, so all the code's shared that way. But the key thing is it's completely separate from the workbook. So if you have a bunch of functions in one workbook and then you start a new one, you've already got that toolkit of functions available. You're not having to copy and paste from one to another. And critically, if you have problems or you need to make changes to code, you're not like creating a function v2 or going through every spreadsheet, like changing things. You can change it once. The code can be, in Git, whatever it is, and then redeployed to your users either on a network drive or by pushing it out to the users. And everyone sees that updated code, so everyone's always on the same version. And it solves a lot of the old problems of things like VBA in the back of workbooks, which was definitely when I first started using in finance, I came across that problem very early on. Where someone's spent their career writing VBA, and then you suddenly you think you have one spreadsheet with a bug, but you've actually got 1,000 spreadsheets all with slightly different variants of that code and slightly different variants of that bug.
It's a mess. It's definitely a part of the Excel hell. Like workbook underscore V41 and workbooks being emailed around. It's horrible.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, and that, I think that really influenced my feeling of how code and spreadsheets really need to be separate. So I'm really happy
that you have that down, because if the code would live in the workbook, it would be a kind of a stopper for me personally. Yeah.
Right.
Cool. Well, you've been successful with PyXL, and I'm happy about that. You mentioned the business aspect before. So what are some lessons that you learned running PyXL as a business?
It's funny. It's always, I think if you speak to any sort of business owner or entrepreneur, they'll tell you it's pretty sort of, it's a bit of a roller coaster in terms of not just the business success, but also kind of the emotion that goes along with it. And I think for a long time, I was very sort of, I don't know, almost tied up in the business to a kind of emotional extent in a long way, because you care so much about it. You put so much into it, and it almost becomes sort of integrated into your identity. And so what I've kind of had to learn is just sort of tease those two things apart a bit more and to look at things a bit more dispassionately. So to give you kind of an example, because I'm starting to ramble. When I get people emailing me, often as is the way with support, you're dealing with people who have a specific problem. They're not understanding something or something's not working for them. And I think certainly early on, I always used to take those kind of on board as like almost like a personal criticism. And so I'd get really defensive and all of this kind of stuff. But on the flip side of that, when I get someone emailing me saying, "Oh, thank you so much for this product. It's like, saved me all this time and everything," I would just completely disregard it. I'd be like, "Well, of course, that's why I wrote it." And so I'd focus on the people having problems, regardless if it was an understanding problem or whatever. And I think that really contributes to this sort of roller coaster of things where you might spend a week being like, "Oh yeah, things are going amazing," and then you spend the next week going like, "Oh my God, like nothing's working." And so I think for me, just learning to put those boundaries in place or to somehow like separate myself from it has been one of the hardest lessons.
Wow, and that ties nicely into the mindset we often talk about here. It's I can definitely attest to
That's
that.
probably why why I resonate so much with the coaching that you offer.
Oh, no, that's not the Python, right? Taking emotion out. No, kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely that being a bit more stoic about things, right? Yeah, I can definitely resonate with that. When we build a platform, you spend nights and days into it, and you can definitely become very emotionally attached to it, right? And then as you grow and you have to delegate, you still care about it a lot, but you also have to be a bit more rational and stoic about things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's the thing
interesting.
is you still care about it, obviously,
A
because
lot.
it's your life. But it's just having that distance or that slight pause for thought before you allow yourself to sort of react and go down that rabbit hole.
But I guess you also have to, right? As things are scaling up, you also will deal with more people and
Yeah,
so how's that? Did you have to delegate things? Do you have a team? Because
it's interesting. Yeah, no,
how
definitely. Uh,
many hours in the day?
yeah, it's funny. My approach, I suppose, up until recently, has always been to automate everything because I'm a programmer, sort of technologist at heart, uh, and I speak to other sort of SaaS business founders and other software things, and people are always shocked by kind of how much gets done, but in the background without people. And my approach has kind of always been with everything. Once I do something, if I have to do it a second time, then I'll carve out some time and automate it. So, one of the things is when you want to go and buy a license, obviously that's a very simple thing that you kind of expect to be automated. But then it's all of the back end stuff that happens when that you get your license key. You also get some onboarding emails, but it also feeds into the accounting system and all this kind of stuff. So really, there's not a huge amount to do until you get to like year-end accounts, and then I have accountants that deal with that. But my bookkeeping is all pretty much just but done automatically. And yeah, there's all kinds of just like little things which you wouldn't really think of so much, and the kind of things where you might be like, "Oh yeah, I'll just get a team to do these kind of things." Whereas I'm always like, "Okay, no, if that's like a repeatable thing, then it needs to be automated." And if it's not a repeatable thing that can be automated, then I'll have a playbook which says, "Okay, when this happens, these are the steps that need to be done," and then I can have someone follow that, and that's how you can do things in a scalable way. Because I don't know. Well, that's how I've managed to make things
Yeah,
happen in
that's
a
a great
scalable way.
feature. A great feature of being a programmer that not only can you do it, but you also have that mindset of getting bored easily. And that's
Yeah,
a really great feature, right? Because then you just want to set and forget things, and
yeah,
then you can actually scale up. You don't really have to get a team up until very far into the process because a lot
yeah.
of things are actually running on code, which is nice. So
And I do
nice.
have one person working for me doing, uh, helping me with various tasks. But at the moment, it's just the two of us. So I'm still fronting the development. And if you ever write into the support, you'll more than likely get an email back from me. If not the first reply, then the second reply will be from me.
Yeah,
So I'm
nice.
still like really, really actively involved in that because that's really how I see. I obviously add value to the company by writing the code, but I also add value by helping people use it effectively. And I don't want to give up being involved in that because that's also how I get feedback and learn what's important to people and learn how the product needs to evolve.
Yeah, exactly. You need to stay close to the conveyor belt, right? You need to have that feedback constantly listen. Otherwise, you might just, the business
Yeah.
might be, the solution might be less focused. So I think that's really important. Yeah. So, which is a nice segue into listening to customers and clients. What's coming next? I heard Microsoft is integrating Python into Excel. So how is that different
Yeah.
from your solution? Maybe you can talk a bit
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
and just overall where you're heading towards.
Yeah. No, thanks for asking that. That's so they did announce a couple of weeks ago the Python in Excel feature, which is going to be Python integrated sort of somewhat natively into Excel, which is currently in preview, but I think it's going to be rolled out to non-preview users in the upcoming months. And yeah, it's an interesting question because obviously the premise sounds very, very similar. So a lot of people are asking, what's the difference? And it turns out they actually are very different. I've just finished doing a lot of kind of research, which was for a talk which I'm giving next week at a conference on exactly this topic. And what I kind of figured after all this research and talking to a lot of people is that really they're for two separate audiences completely. So the way Microsoft's new feature works is rather than integrating Python into Excel as Pixel does, essentially what you do is write Python code inside of Excel cells. So it's like an advanced formula language. And then when you do that, the Python code gets shipped off to an Azure VM, or I'm not sure exactly how it works, but it's essentially a Jupyter notebook running in Azure. So your Python code gets shipped off to that, and then sometime later the results come back and populate in Excel. And for me, I guess because of what we talked about with the enterprise things and version control and all this stuff, I was instantly like, oh my God, like, why would anyone want to do that? And through talking to people, what I found was that people kind of in my circles and my audience have the same reaction. But there is this subset of analysts who are kind of excited to learn about Python, but don't feel confident enough or aren't able to just install Python and start using it. So having the ability to write a few lines of Python in Excel and see the results come back for them, I think is going to be a great learning tool for them and a great sort of first foray into learning Python. And I can see from the Microsoft point of view, having the code inside of Excel, making it so that you never leave Excel is great for them. But I do think that those people, once they realize that running the code, sending the code to the cloud and waiting for the results is quite slow. There's various other sort of features that I don't like about it. But I think they can use that to learn a bit of Python and then kind of graduate, if you like, and start using Jupyter notebooks, things like that, maybe coming back to Excel and using Pixel. But I think it will be a great introduction to people. But it's very, very different to how Pixel works, where with Pixel, you can write these user-defined functions, you can write macros, ribbons, all of this kind of stuff. And it's all about creating an experience in Excel that's familiar and useful to Excel users from a Python backend, whereas the Python in Excel thing has a slightly different focus, which is this kind of, writing Python code directly in Excel. So I don't, does that answer your question? Sorry, I was starting to ramble a bit there.
Makes a lot of sense. And I'm happy that you, thanks for explaining that, because that was, of course, my first question when we engaged, like, how is this going to, that sounds very similar to your tool. And then actually it's not, right?
Exactly.
Like both, so the commonality is that you're both staying in Excel, which is nice, but I'm a bit skeptical if that's only like a cloud link versus your stuff that can is nicely separated and lives locally, which is a very strong pro in my point of view.
I think it's what's interesting with once you start putting the Python code in the Excel cells is if you write one function to do something, then if you want to call that somewhere else, you're effectively copying and pasting that code all over the same workbook. So it's not really reusable, and it's also not really inspectable by an Excel user. So if you're giving a spreadsheet to, let's say your boss or a portfolio manager or something, they're not going to be able to understand the spreadsheet and look at it and confirm whether they think it's right or not. Whereas with Pixel, it's just Excel functions, so anyone who's been using Excel can understand it. And I think that's also kind of a key difference.
So you mean there's one level more of abstraction in the sense that with Pixel, you would write a function, so the function is clearly named, but you just see the container, not the implementation, where the Microsoft version or how they are implementing it is that you have a lot of inline code almost.
Precisely. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Nice. Good to know. Good to know. Cool. Well, I think that's a lot for us to digest, and I think the audience will definitely enjoy this, especially the more like data analytics people. But still, also a lot of people pending are, wanting to know about this MS integration, and yeah, interesting to learn today about your tool. The last question I have: what are you reading at the moment?
So there's a couple actually. I feel I have to mention one. So I'm, as well as being a developer, I'm also a whitewater kayaker. I don't know if I told you that before. And a friend of mine wrote a book a while ago. He's like a world-class freestyle whitewater kayaker. So his book, Freestyle Unlocked, is a really, really nice book. And it's a lot of sort of tips and tricks that he's learnt over his career as a world-class kayaker. So I'm studying that.
Interesting.
And another one that I'm reading, I'm almost finished it actually, but this is one that I think you might like if you've not read it already, which is the Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Do you know this one?
I read that a while ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm still finishing it, but I'm enjoying it. I don't really read that many business type books or programming type books, but these ones around, it's for your listeners that don't know, Rick Rubin was or is a very sort of well-known music producer, and this book I guess it's a lot of it is about his process as a producer, but what it becomes is a lot more than that, and it's a lot more about psychology and how people work and how to get the best out of people and how to get the best out of yourself. But it's written in a really nice way, and a lot of it, although I don't know anything about music production, there's a lot of kind of parallels you can draw with your software development, for example. So yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah,
How did you find it?
Yeah, as a content creator, it's so I cannot remember. I need to go back to my notes, but when I do remember when I read it, it gave me a lot of inspiration because it was a lot about creativity and as you said, the process, right? So I found that very useful, inspiring for my content creation process, right? So yeah, but I need to go back to the notes, but I probably need to read it again. I did remember it was full of gems.
Yeah, I think it feels like it is one of those books where you'd probably get a lot more on a second read.
I got it on Kindle. When I read it, I thought I might need to get the physical edition. Really good one. Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, any final words, shout out before we wrap it up?
I mean, only the obvious sort of plugs, which is if you're interested in using Python and Excel, you want to learn how you can deploy Python code to Excel users, then please do reach out, come and talk to me, and always happy to chat about this stuff.
Yeah, we will link all this in the show notes, and you're on our circle as well, so people can also reach out there. And yeah, thanks so much for talking on the podcast today, sharing all this good stuff, and yeah, really exciting, really inspiring.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. We hope you enjoyed this episode. To hear more from us, go to Pybites/friends. That is pybit.es/friends, and receive a free gift just for being a friend of the show.
And to join our thriving Slack community of Python programmers, go to pybites/community. That's pybit.es/community. We hope to see you there and catch you in the next episode.